let's start tonight by talking about what's happening in Minneapolis because it is an intersection of politics and religion and so many of the things we talk about. And if you're not familiar with what has been happening, let me just set the scene here for a little bit, which is that Trump's ICE organization, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement people, they have been going to churches to basically terrorize immigrants. It is what they do, it's what they were hired to do. Anyone they suspect needs to be deported. And there's no shortage of headlines that tell you that is what they're doing. Here's an example of it from the National Catholic Reporter. Viral warnings of planned ICE raids on churches have pastors worried. And look at this. The pastor of an 80-person Latino Pentecostal church got a concerned WhatsApp audio message. The message, allegedly created by an unidentified pastor, circulating among Atlanta area evangelical faith leaders, claimed massive immigration raids would occur there Thursday and Friday. This is from November. But it says church members were soon sending him messages asking what they should do about the potential raids. By that evening, at their teaching and prayer service, he had to address the rumor with his congregation. Stay calm, he told them in Spanish, but take care of yourselves. Don't go out if you don't need to go out. I also want to show you what has been said in one particular lawsuit filed against ICE. Look at this. For example, last month alone, agents seized a man in front of a church near Los Angeles and brandished a rifle at a pastor in the process, detained a grandfather in the same city who was dropping his granddaughter off at a church school, arrested a man outside a church in Oregon, and carried out arrests on 2 Catholic parish properties in Montclair and Highland, California. So this is what ICE has been doing to churches. They have no problem going on church property, terrorizing church members, church pastors. That is what ICE has been doing. And I only want to point out why that is happening when you hear about the story that just took place in St. Paul, Minnesota, just this past week. And the reason this matters is because a lot of those pastors, especially ones with immigrant congregations, they have been telling them, you know what, just stay home. Don't come to church. It is dangerous for you to come to church right now because who knows if ICE is going to bust in. That's the terror that ICE has inflicted on religious communities. Like the Republican Party has made it virtually impossible for those church members to feel safe in a house of worship. And that is partly why last week in St. Paul, a group of about 36 activists in Minneapolis, where an ICE agent murdered an innocent woman, Renee Good, earlier this month, they decided to interrupt services at a Southern Baptist Convention affiliated church, City's Church in St. Paul. They interrupted services there last Sunday morning. They basically stepped into the building, yelled out things like ICE out and justice for Renee Good. And the reason they're going to that particular church is important because they're not just storming some random Christian church. That would be dumb. What's the purpose of that? They went to this particular place because if you go to their website, and I'm showing you their website right here, this is City's Church in St. Paul. You could see that on their list of pastors, we have a whole slew of white men we can choose from. Jonathan Parnell is a name you're going to want to remember in just a second. But also, if you scroll down here, you got this guy over here, David Easterwood. He is one of their many, many white pastors. David Easterwood is one of the pastors on staff. He is also, according to a C-SPAN aired press conference that Kristi Noem was at, he is also the acting field office director for the ICE brigade in St. Paul, Minnesota. So this guy, who I don't know if his day job is terrorizing brown people or just lying to a lot of brown people or whatever, but this guy works as a pastor, and he is not just an ICE agent, he is an ICE field director. And he showed up at a press conference and bragged about all the stuff ICE is doing. So These activists, 36 or so activists, went to his church and they interrupted the services and they chanted, "Ice out, justice for Renee Good." And I will say it was a peaceful protest in the sense that they weren't there to hurt anybody. They did not cause any damage. They were not they were not flipping tables. They literally went there to say their chants. They had it on camera and they left. This was a protest organized by 3 groups: the Racial Justice Network, Black Lives Matter Minnesota, and Black Lives Matter Twin Cities. And just to state the obvious, what happened inside that church on Sunday morning is nothing compared to the actual harm that ICE agents have inflicted upon the city's residents. And yet, the same Justice Department, the Trump-run Justice Department that refused to investigate the officer who murdered Renee Good, despite all the evidence that said he totally murdered her without justification, they are now pretending that this church protest is the greatest crime that has ever happened in the history of man. This is an article from ABC News. Check this out. U.S. Department of Justice Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon said her agency is investigating civil rights violations by those people desecrating a house of worship and interfering with Christian worshipers. A house of worship is not a public forum for your protest. It is a space protected from exactly such acts by federal criminal and civil laws! Exclamation point, she said on social media. Listen. They did not desecrate this house of worship by going in and demanding social justice. Easterwood, the pastor, he desecrated that space when he decided threatening brown people with deportation was an extension of his faith. So don't tell me what the protesters did was a desecration. By the way, you may have seen this in the news as well. The former CNN anchor, Don Lemon, he found out that this protest was happening before it happened, so he documented it with a video camera, basically an on-the-spot reporter. It's the sort of thing reporters do all the time. There were reporters who had advanced knowledge of the Charlottesville protest years ago, the whatever they said, anti-Semitic riot there. The point is, all these right-wing people are like, wait a minute, that's a black guy we do know. We want his head on a platter. So they're furious that Don Lemon knew about this stuff. In any case, I would also argue that the people inside that church were far better served listening to what the protesters had to say than anything they would have heard from the pulpit. I read a Reddit comment that actually said that what the protesters did was actual prophecy, because the definition of the word prophecy is basically spreading the truth of God to people for whom God's word needs a correction. So you are translating the truth of what God is saying to people who need to hear that. That's essentially what these protesters were doing. So call them prophetic. Now, I'm sure there are some people, maybe they're in the comments right now, that are saying that what those protesters did was not smart. They will say that it wasn't strategic, that it plays right into the right-wing persecution complex, that this is a narrative. It fuels a narrative in conservative media that protesters are against Christianity. They love that narrative. Here's the thing, though. If you know anything about how the right-wing media ecosystem works, you know that those narratives were written long before this protest ever happened. They will use anything to justify the story they want to push, no matter how insignificant it is. If David Easterwood got a paper cut, they would find a way to blame that on liberals. So I am not worried about the fact that, oh, this doesn't play well in the media. The right-wing media was never going to make this look like anything except a travesty. So don't fall for their framing of it. I would argue that the Christians in that church dealt with, at worst, a minor inconvenience. It is nothing compared to the horrors that have been inflicted on the entire lives of the people who live in that city, in that community. And that is happening in part because a pastor at that church is personally leading a group of law-breaking, armed, government-backed mercenaries. And the tactics that are used by the government officials to blow this incident completely out of proportion is not that different from the way white supremacists once described civil rights protesters, right? Oppressive powers are never going to be calm when they're faced with acts of civil disobedience. This is what John Lewis talked about when he said cause good trouble, right? Take people out of their comfort zones. And there are so many examples of movements for justice that were denounced as disorderly, disruptive by the very institutions that just want to maintain the status quo. And honestly, what else do you want the protesters to do at this point? Do you think ICE is listening to them? Do you think if Chuck Schumer writes a letter to Kristi Noem that she's going to back down? No, we've all tried the calm ways of dealing with this, but you are dealing with extremists who are not interested in what anyone else has to say. JD Vance was in Minneapolis today. Do you think he was there to listen to what people who don't like ICE have to say? Or was he there to just amplify whatever rhetoric he wants to push? So conservatives got mad when the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, told ICE to, quote, get the fuck out of my city, as if a curse word was worse than whatever ICE is doing there. They treat everything as a 5-alarm fire, and they escalate in response to anything. So don't believe that Republicans are going to listen to people if only they were peaceful. No, they're not. So maybe this protest finally breaks through, and maybe they will realize that what they are doing is horrific. And if I don't think Republicans are going to figure that out, but maybe people in that church don't realize that their pastor is not one of the good guys, you know? So here's the thing that they are trying to do now. If protests are forbidden in houses of worship, because that's what Harmeet Dillon was saying to ABC News, then surely ICE raids on church property are illegal too, right? But no, that hypocrisy was not addressed by the Trump administration. Neither was the fact that the ICE leader, who has a side gig as this church's pastor, the fact that he has no business telling other people how to live a moral life, because it's not like he's doing that. In fact, look at this. This is also ABC News here. Look at what this pastor was doing. In a January 5th court filing, Easterwood defended ICE's tactics in Minnesota, such as swapping license plates so that ICE cannot be detected, and spraying protesters with chemical irritants. I don't know, where in the Bible do you get that spraying people with chemicals is a good idea? You get the feeling that this guy was cheering on the murder of George Floyd at this point. And by the way, I mentioned that the head pastor at this church was that guy Parnell. According to the website A Public Witness, look at the deal with Parnell here. I wanted to show you this if I can find it all of a sudden. Look at what he's associated with here. Here we go. Yeah, here. Look at the leader of this church, Jonathan Parnell. Parnell also serves on the board of trustees of Bethlehem College and Seminary in Minneapolis, a school founded by Baptist Calvinist preacher John Piper. Last week, a professor at that school used the Sunday service at another church in the area to pray for God to bless ICE and break the teeth of ICE's opponents. That's the pastor of this church. That's who he's affiliated with. He didn't say that. He's affiliated with them. But it goes to show you it's not like Easterbrook's the only bad guy in this mix. Now, Easterbrook, by all accounts, was not even at the church when the protesters came there last week. But I don't think that guy deserves a moment of calm anywhere he goes for the rest of his life. If he goes out to a restaurant, everyone should be screaming at him and making his life a living hell. That's what he deserves for what he is doing. And the people who attend who are part of the congregation here, they should be ashamed of their own complicity here. Because why are you going to a church that involves these pastors who are either directly or indirectly aligned with this terrorist organization? If you go to a church like that, yes, you are part of the problem. And that is essentially what one protester said later on as well. Let me show you this. Yeah, here we go. Look at what one protester said. Her name is Nakima Levy Armstrong. Nakima Levy Armstrong, who participated in the protests, dismissed the potential DOJ investigation as a sham and a distraction from federal agents' actions in Minneapolis, St. Paul. When you think about the federal government unleashing barbaric ICE agents upon our community and all the harm that they have caused, to have someone serving as a pastor who oversees these ICE agents is almost unfathomable to me. Armstrong is an ordained reverend. If people are more concerned about someone coming to a church on a Sunday and disrupting business as usual than they are about the atrocities that we are experiencing in our community, then they need to check their theology and they need to check their hearts. Absolutely, and well said. And I think elsewhere, somewhere, Armstrong added that Jesus went into so-called houses of God and he flipped over tables, so that is what they did. She said, we flipped over a table for truth, justice, and righteousness. And yet, when Harmeet Dillon was doing media interviews with right-wing conspiracy theorists, look at what she was saying about this. This is with Benny Johnson, a plagiarist and notorious liar. Assistant DOJ Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmeet Dillon, what does she say? The people on the left we're talking about, they're not familiar with what goes on in a house of worship. A lot of them are godless people. What? First of all, most atheists know exactly what goes on inside a church because a lot of us used to go to church. It's why we are atheists today. But also, as I just showed you, Nakima Armstrong is an ordained reverend. She is not an atheist. These are Christians going to protest what this church is doing. So Dillon is just lying. And that protest lasted like 20 minutes. But Dillon and the Trump administration, they are trying to distract from what ICE is doing to people like Renee Good. They took a 5-year-old into their, what did they do? They had a 5-year-old in their power and they used the 5-year-old to get access to the kid's dad. I heard they were driving through intersections where schools were in session this week. And that's besides all the Epstein stuff they want to get everyone's attention off of. But they are now using the protest, the peaceful 20-minute minor inconvenience, as an argument for why they should send more ICE troops to Minneapolis, as if that's going to help the situation. So make no mistake, this is not some attack on Christianity. This is not an attack by the godless. Honestly, I wish we could take credit for this, but we can't. This is a protest against cruelty, and a lot of Christians participated in it and they endorsed it. In fact, a local Lutheran minister wrote this online somewhere: you cannot worship a savior on Sunday who is crucified by a violent state, while the rest of the week acting as a violent agent of an unjust state force who is killing and targeting Americans according to hate. It is deeply ironic that the president of the Southern Baptist Convention's North American Mission Board, he promised to provide protection for their churches if Minnesota leaders won't contain lawlessness. The SBC can't even protect victims of sexual abuse in their own congregations. But no, they got to send protection because some people might walk into church and say, hey, do good. Got to have protection from that. The lawlessness is not coming from those protesters. It's coming from guys like Easterbrook, not from the people trying to help the least of these. Now, you may have seen this today as well. This is a headline from today as I'm making this video. Minnesota church protest leader Nakima Levy Armstrong arrested, say federal officers. And literally, federal officials say they have arrested 3 of the protesters who disrupted a worship service at a Minnesota church this past weekend. Don Lemon is not one of the people they arrested because he's just a journalist, but they did go after 3 of the protest leaders. Now, just because you arrest them doesn't mean they are going to be found guilty of doing anything wrong. And we don't even know yet, I don't think, what they are charged with. But the Department of Justice has said in their press releases and whatnot that they are going to try to use something called the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, the FACE Act, which is actually a law that was written years ago to protect people who need to access abortion clinics. Basically, the law says you can't block them from entering those places. The law says you are not allowed to obstruct, desecrate, or prevent access to abortion clinics. But that law also applies to houses of worship. And that's what the Department of Justice is saying. These people broke that. But I don't know if I buy that ruling. I don't know if I buy that decision. And I'm not a lawyer, but it doesn't seem like those protesters obstructed anyone from going into church. They did not desecrate anything inside the church. They did not prevent access for people who wanted to enter the church. They walked in, they said what they had to say, and they left. I don't think that's a violation of this particular federal law. And keep in mind, there are instances, you could find them online, of right-wing protesters storming into LGBTQ affirming churches and basically doing some version of the same thing as if, I mean, I'm not saying those situations are analogous, obviously, but the point is the Justice Department has not gone ever after those right-wing protesters. So we'll see. I mean, it's also ironic to me that these same Christians who are in an uproar about what happened at this church, these people would try to deport Jesus if he was walking right in front of them. So to watch conservatives clutch their pearls over temporary chants for social justice while excusing armed agents who are stalking church parking lots and a pastor who encourages them to harass brown people, that means you are excusing right-wing brutality. The protest that happened at this church made some people uncomfortable. That's it. ICE is actively destroying innocent people's lives, and you can guess which one the Trump administration gives a shit about. What happened in that church was peaceful and targeted and in line with Christian theology, and no one's faith was under attack. But you can bet the Republican administration will do everything it can to redirect the public's attention away from what ICE is doing and toward those who are brave enough to confront them. Nothing makes them angrier than protesters who are calling attention to the shit they do. Don't fall for it. They want silence. They want people to just bow down to whatever they do. They don't deserve it. The scandal here is not that some voices were raised for 20 minutes. The scandal is that a pastor actively supporting Trump's reign of terror was preaching from that pulpit in the first place. I think that's it. I'll stop there for now. What questions do you have about this? It's infuriating stuff. Thank you for that donation. The right's hatred of Lemon and Renee Good are at least in part because they're both gay. The churches have always hated us and would erase us if they could. I think there is a point to that. I think that has a lot to do with why. I mean, Renee Good, I believe, was a missionary. She was a Christian, and that wasn't enough for them because she was in a same-sex married relationship. She has a kid or two. Like Don Lemon, I believe, is in a relationship as well. So yeah, they hate that these people are gay and not ashamed of it. Thanks for that donation. I think Den will take care of the troll if anyone is in there. She had 3 kids, I am told, Renee. Good. Church is a protected space. Terms and conditions apply, subject to skin color. Oh, don't worry. I got a story about that real soon. I know publicly everyone has to say keep peaceful, but if everyone is going to get government escalation, how soon until people decide to escalate? I know, and that's why you don't want the government making things worse by sending even more goons into a city where they were not asked for, they were not needed. The Trump administration has this thing where they just say every city where like black people, brown people live in, though, and they all happen to be in like blue states, that's where we need to send in the troops. No, you're not helping. You're not making anything better. And in fact, I'm sure someone can find this. If you look at the murder rate per capita, it's not the blue states that are the worst. It is big cities in red states. But you don't see the Trump administration sending ICE agents to any of those places. To play devil's advocate, would Christians doing this in a place of worship that isn't Christian be okay? Or am I missing the bigger picture? Yeah, I mean, if Christians went to a mosque and protested it, the open question is, are we okay with that happening? And again, the question is, what federal crime would they have committed? We can make an argument that what they are doing and why they are doing it matters. I think that's a big part of the issue here. Because knowing conservative Christians, if they went to a mosque, it's not for any justified reason. But if the justification is, hey, your pastor is leading a group of terrorists, I get it. That's not what we're talking about in this situation. But I think everyone's just asking for like a level head here. What do you think is worse? The 20 minutes of interruption of a sermon, which I grant, if I'm a member of that church, I would be annoyed, versus what ICE is doing to the lives of innocent people in that city. Like, it's not just brown people, immigrants who are being harassed here. Schools can't be in session because of what ICE is doing. People don't feel comfortable going to the grocery store because ICE is there. They are terrorizing the whole community, including the straight whites. So, like, I appreciate the devil's advocacy here. I guess my question boils down to, what is it that you are protesting, before I can give you my answer as to whether I think that's justified or not. But also the bigger question is there a federal crime being committed here? Is there any crime being committed here? And I don't trust that Pam Bondi knows that there's a federal crime being committed here. Trump is praying people break the peace before elections. Any reason for the Insurrection Act and the suspension of elections for election security? I agree with you to a large extent there. I think Trump is looking for anything he can do to send more of his thugs and find a reason to cancel the election, do whatever it is. But also, I think he's going to find a reason to do that regardless of what people do. So I don't think this is a question of, watch out, everyone. Maybe it's better to stay quiet because you don't want him going nuclear on everybody. I'm telling you, if someone makes a tweet he doesn't like, he's going to go nuclear on everybody if that's what he thinks he has to do, because he's a maniac and he's surrounded by people who will allow him to be a maniac.